I did say that the middle of the thermal, because it's already got going and it's developed, is typically more uniform. That is not necessarily the case. Even, thermals can be big, and there's sections in them that could be going up faster than others. So what I've got here on the left-hand side, we've got a picture of a thermal, which is shaded in red underneath the cloud, and there's a couple of strong patches in there. So I took a cross section across the line AA and depicted it on the right-hand side. The figures of 2 meters per second and 4 meters per second is just something I made up for explanation purposes. But what I want to get across here is that we can have varying rates of climb within a thermal. And if you are, for example, flying at the transition zone between that 2 meters and that 4 meters per second along this line over here, and you have half your wing on this side and half on that side, it's going to feel rock and roll because half of the wing is flowing up, in a airflow that's double the other side. So that's why there is some rock and roll there. By understanding this, you will understand that, and actually this is something I have to even tell myself to do sometimes when I'm flying out there, is that when you're in these strong climbs and it's rock and roll, rather be turning and have a banked wing that's at an angle instead of flying straight with a flat wing. Because if you're flying straight with a flat wing, then you will feel more of the bumps. But if you are turning and your wing is banked, then you don't feel those bumps as much, and it's actually much more comfortable to fly, and that means your brain is happier because it's smoother. So rather be turning inside it than flying straight through it. And if you want to leave, then open up your turn and fly out. But just flying straight through across, not doing any turns, you will experience more of the bumpiness. Any questions?
All good.
Cool. Let's keep moving.
Sorry, Ria.
Yes.
Just very quickly, you've got a section that's labeled as 50 meters between two gliders. Can I ask why that is?
That was just a picture that I took from, this was an XC Mag.
Okay, cool.
That would have been there. But where this, I'm pretty sure this was going to, was what I was talking about earlier. That bottom pilot has just missed the lift, and the other guy who's just inside the bottom of the thermal, he's in it. And that's the thing. So this over here is kind of like an extended, not quite a bubble, much more of an extended piece of it, but it's not a full column going from ground up to the top. And a meter's difference is the difference between getting into a thermal and not. And this is why you want to fly efficiently, and even climbing up to the top or making good decisions on where you go, because just perhaps spending a few more turns inside a thermal is going to give you that 50 meters. And when these two pilots go out looking for the next thermal, the guy who has that 50 meters has this advantage, and it could be the difference between a short flight and a long flight.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool. We are still continuing on our discussion about structures. On the left-hand side, we have, you can see we have a shading in of a thermal. And there's a couple of things that's apparent over here, is that this thermal is actually started off from one piece and broken up at times, and then gotten up to the cloud base. So broken up, combined, and then got to the top. So when you're flying in a thermal, this can happen. And, and that's why sometimes you're in lift and then the Vario is completely silent. There's nothing. And we'll talk about ways to center in on thermals, but it's good to understand that they can break up and they can also rejoin. And if we look at the diagram on the right-hand side, this is a joining of thermals from two different sources, which is also quite common. In this example, I've got a thermal that's on the windward side of the mountain and a thermal that's on the leeward side of the mountain, and they both meet each other above the mountain and become a stronger, bigger thermal. the leeward and front side of the mountain aren't these only examples. This can be happening out in the flats, wherever that you have different thermals meeting each other, joining, becoming a stronger one, and then going up. And in terms of structure, where this is good to understand and build this mental picture whenever you are flying, is that if you were flying along this thermal here on the windward side and going up, going up, going up, when the other one joins, it, because you've got a mixing of two different columns coming together, it will be a bit more rock and roll. And the reason for that is because of this mixing of air, and you stick through it and it becomes a much smoother climb and carry on. Of course, all of these decisions will be based on where you are and the terrain and how far the terrain is from you. But we'll talk about that in the threat and error management section at the end. If there's any questions, please send them through. The next thing that I would like to talk about is the effect of wind on a thermal. So you can have thermals on no wind days, and this is one of the awesome things about thermals. We do not need wind to fly. I've had flights in Porterville where you're standing at launch and there's pretty much no wind, like conditions for forward launching, and then you get off the mountain, you get into the front, and you get into a booming thermal and going up. We can have thermals in no wind and thermals in wind. But wind does impact on the structure of a thermal. So the stronger the thermal, the less of the impact. And on the other side of the coin, the stronger the wind, the more of the impact. So we're looking at the left-hand side. We've got a no wind cross section over there. It's just something I drew up. And you can see that the different colors are representing different climb rates, where it's strongest in the middle, getting weaker towards the outside. On the right-hand side, we throw in some wind now, and the windward side here. And you can imagine it's the weaker parts are going to be more affected by the wind. So the weaker parts push out, and we end up with this egg-shaped thermal. And there's an important point here. Number one is that the strongest part of the lift is here on the windward side, on the upwind side, and it tends to be weaker on the downwind side. The other thing that is important to realize is that a thermal has mass. It's kind of like its own object in the sky. And like any object and wind flow, we have an upwind side and we have a downward or a leeward side. And the leeward side is where you have mixing of air, which is turbulent and rough, and it feels shit. So when you're out flying and you're feeling some rock and roll, and you know, perhaps you do have some lift, but it's quite shitty. Before you leave that thermal because you're not happy, think to yourself, okay, where's the wind coming from? Where am I? It's triggering off those trees or whatever it is, and push upwind, push into wind. You'll find that it will likely become smoother. You can also think about this when you are flying cross country. So if I was flying downwind and I started at this point here on the left-hand side, the next thermal that I encounter, if I'm flying straight downwind, I will be going into the upwind section of it. So that's cool. If I was flying into wind, so coming from the right-hand side to the thermal, I'm first going to have to go through the shitty leeward side and then into the front where the thermal is. And where you would typically do this is you see people climbing out here, you're on this side and you're like, oh, let me go and join them. On your way to join them, it's all rock and roll. The reason why it's rock and roll is because you're on the back end there. Keep control of your wing, push through it, get to the front, and have much smoother, fun thermaling.